What you're looking at is either the natural progression of an advanced financial system or a calculated, diabolical heist designed to rob you of your wealth and freedoms at a moment's notice.
The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar.
This so-called advanced financial system, where the majority of your wealth is being held in dollar or dollar-denominated assets, is about to go through the largest shift in history. It's not a matter of if your wealth will be taken, but when. I'm going to expose 4 hidden truths shielded from public view by those in power, and why this is key to understanding how your financial stability is an illusion by design. I will reveal what the masses don't yet understand about safe haven assets so that you can protect yourself the same way that the wealthy elites have been doing in preparation for what is already being called the greatest wealth transfer in human history. I'm Taylor Kenney with ITM Trading, your trusted source for all things gold, silver, and lifelong wealth protection. First, I'll lay the foundation. Then I'll reveal the 4 hidden truths that threaten your financial security. And finally, I'll show you how to use this knowledge to protect yourself. The foundation. It's crucial not to skip this foundational history as it sets the stage for the deceptive maneuvers that follow, and without it, you won't understand what happens at the end. For most of its history, the United States dollar was backed by physical, tangible gold. However, in the aftermath of World War I and following the crash of 1929, the United States government needed to print more money to boost the economy. The problem? The United States government didn't have enough gold to cover the amount they wanted to print. In short, the US government needed more gold to control the money supply. So how did they get it? From the people. In 1933, by Executive Order 6102, President Roosevelt made it illegal to own most gold and required that people turn in their gold in exchange for US dollars. The government turned around and revalued gold against the dollar. Think about what that means. You trade gold for dollars one day, and the next day the powers that be tell you that those dollars are worth half of what you traded them for? Overnight, Americans lost 42% of their purchasing power. The government stole the people's wealth to fund the US economy. Fast forward to 1971. The United States is the most powerful country in the world. The US dollar is the global reserve currency. And guess what? Once again, the United States does not have enough gold to properly back the amount of dollars in circulation. As countries began to cash in their dollars for gold, President Nixon realized that a collapse was coming. The solution? Get rid of the gold standard altogether and keep printing US dollars.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve.
Up until that point, money printing was somewhat checked because it was still tied to actual physical gold. But with the decoupling of the dollar and gold, the Federal Reserve was granted unprecedented printing powers. So here we are, post-1971. The Federal Reserve prints currency at will, a currency that has no real value outside of the nominal one given to it by the government. And it's against this backdrop that we confront hidden truth number 1, the illusion of ownership. Following the decoupling of 1971, there was an explosion of financialization. What I mean is that financial institutions started creating complex financial tools to make themselves even richer, building houses of cards involving securities, derivatives, and interest rate swaps. With all of these tools at their disposal, the money-making potential was through the roof. But the system couldn't keep up. There was a need to digitize securities to make it easier to make trades. And thus, in comes the Depository Trade Commission, or DTC. And what used to be paper becomes ones and zeros. Once stock certificates were dematerialized, the DTC created a subsidiary, Seed & Co., which on its face was created to facilitate with the transfer of stocks. Seed & Co. is where all of the securities live, so to speak. But its true function is right there in the name, hidden in plain sight. Seed. We cede ownership of all stocks to this giant centralized subsidiary. That's right. Seed & Co. legally owns 83% of all publicly traded stocks in the United States, which means you don't legally own your stocks. You might be saying, what do you mean I don't own my stocks? Of course I do. I can see them right there in my account. But what you're looking at is actually a security entitlement, a beneficial contractual claim held in pooled form. And your claim is just one in a long chain that ends with Seed & Co. Say you own your stocks through a financial institution like Bank of America. Great. You have a contractual claim to your stocks. But guess what? So does Bank of America. And the law says that if Bank of America is insolvent, even if that insolvency is because of fraud or illegal wrongdoing, they, as the secured creditor, have priority over you, the unsecured creditor, and can cash in on your stock to pay off their debts and keep themselves afloat. So your securities aren't technically yours. But what about the deposits in your bank account? Surely those are protected. This brings us to hidden truth number 2, bank bail-ins. When you reach a certain age, it's a rite of passage to open your first checking account, your first savings account. Everything in our society has programmed us to think that if you want your wealth to stay safe, you put it in a bank. How is it then that your bank is gambling with your deposit and leaving your wealth vulnerable? A federal rule called Regulation D allows banks to sweep your account or temporarily take the cash out of your account and move it into an account under their name, where they can then use that to make incredibly risky bets. In theory, it's all well and good when the bank is making a profit. Your cash returns safe and sound back into your account, and no one is the wiser.
New York Community Bank sinking once again today.
What happens when the banks start losing? And it's not a matter of if, but when. We've seen what these institutions are capable of doing as a result of 1971, when the decoupling of the dollar and gold allowed banks to make reckless profits at your expense. In 2008, they bet it all on derivatives and toppled the entire system. Banks collapsed, people lost everything, and collectively we said, never again. But 2008 was just a warning. The root of the problem was never fixed. It was papered over. Banks were bailed out with financial incentive to keep gambling on an even bigger scale. JP Morgan Chase, the biggest bank in the US, has roughly $3 trillion worth of assets. By contrast, they have close to $60 trillion worth of derivative exposure, and your deposits are tied up in that. On a global scale, the total amount of estimated derivatives is over $1 quadrillion. That's 10 times the current global GDP. But it's not just the sheer size of these banks' exposure that will make this next collapse worse. It's that now there are laws like Regulation D, UCC security entitlement, and others that leave you more vulnerable than you were before. So what happens when the house of cards collapses, but this time it's on an exponential scale, the magnitude of which we've never seen, especially when this time the lender of last resort, the Federal Reserve, can't come to the rescue because the exposure is way too high? Well, the plan is already in place. They're going to take your deposits. How? A bank bail-in.
It's important that people understand they can be bailed in. They're going to be.
But I don't think you have much hope of reaching a public that doesn't have a professional need to know.
A bank bail-in is a scenario where a bank can take its depositors' cash to cover its own insolvency. If this sounds like it should be illegal, you're right. It should be, but it isn't. In fact, it's already happened. In Cyprus, in 2013, 2 of the country's largest banks collapsed, and overnight, depositors' accounts were drained to stabilize the failing banks, leaving people without their hard-earned savings. This isn't some distant concern, but a real possibility here in the United States. On our own soil, the FDIC, responsible for insuring people's bank accounts, has discussed bail-ins in their meetings. And even on a bigger scale, the Central Bank for Banks, the BIS, has a playbook ready for how to facilitate bail-ins. That's right. Should your bank go under, they are legally allowed to and ready to take your cash to recoup their losses. And good luck trying to fight the financial institutions that pull all of the levers of power. But what's even more terrifying is that it only takes one major failure for the entire system to crumble. I mean, be honest, if you found out that another institution was bailing their depositors in, wouldn't you sprint to your bank to withdraw your deposits before the same could be done to you? But unfortunately, we don't need to wait for a bail-in to have our wealth robbed because it's already happening right now.
A rough week for the banking industry.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank.
The second biggest bank collapse in U.S. history.
And that brings us to Hidden Truth 3, hyperinflation and a currency reset. We've talked about how your dollar-denominated assets aren't really yours, but the real kicker is that the cash in your wallet is disintegrating in value before your very eyes. Government debt eventually needs to be repaid through higher taxes and inflation, which in turn reduces the purchasing power of your dollar. And US debt is rising at an alarming rate, increasing 35% in the last 4 years. This means more inflation. So right now, as US debt skyrockets, your wealth, i.e. your purchasing power, is actively being chipped away at. It's economics 101. As the supply of dollars increases through unchecked money printing, as it has for decades, the demand for those dollars, the value of those dollars, decreases. In fact, since 1971, when the dollar was decoupled from gold, the US dollar has lost almost all of its purchasing power. The only reason that the United States has been able to remain in a position of power despite its extreme mountain of debt is because the US dollar is the global reserve currency for now. The United States credit rating was downgraded. Superpowers like China, Russia, and Saudi Arabia, just to name a few, are actively colluding to move away from the dollar. So what happens when a drop in demand for dollars reaches critical mass? It will be catastrophic. The government would not be able to borrow what it needs to, which would result in astronomical import costs, extreme currency printing, and higher taxes, all of which would result in a never-ending downward spiral. This downward spiral would catapult us into hyperinflation, marking the end of this fiat currency's life cycle and guaranteeing a collapse of the economy where the US dollar wouldn't be worth the kindling it provided your fire. What would you do when faced with such panic and desperation? What lengths would you go to provide for your family? It's at this very moment when people are looking for any kind of relief that the true threat to our financial autonomy is introduced, which leads us to the ultimate hidden truth. Central bank digital currencies. Amidst the desperation and chaos, the Federal Reserve will unfurl its grand scheme, a surveillance state where every transaction is scrutinized. A new digital landscape, a seismic shift in control where financial autonomy is a thing of the past. They deposit funds into your digital wallet and your every move is monitored. Your purchases are regulated. Only certain items and quantities are available for purchase with your funds. If you say the wrong thing online, your account is frozen. Trying to save for a rainy day? Well, suddenly your funds have an expiration date, so you better spend those quickly to help the economy. This is the future they imagine. This is the one they want. Total and complete control. A pair of financial handcuffs issued by good old Uncle Sam. We know our cash isn't safe in the banks. We don't own our securities. And the United States is on track towards de-dollarization, which would result in a currency reset, ushering in of a CBDC, stripping away our financial freedoms. When the reset comes, and it will come, you will be powerless. That is, unless you protect yourself. The person who has true money through the reset is the person who retains their power. And what is true money? What gave the dollar its value in the first place? What did the US government take from the American people in 1933 to bolster its own strength? What has intrinsic value? Value in ancient Egypt and value in the global economy today?
We know specifically that central banks are buying. Costco, we know, is selling lots of physical gold. Again, high net worth Americans buying physical gold, putting it in a vault.
Because you can't get to my vault.
Exactly.
You can freeze my account, but you can't come get my
gold.
Gold keeps its intrinsic value better than anything else in the world. That has been true for 4,000 years.
To protect yourself and your family, it's time to look outside of the financial system. If you want to understand how you can protect your wealth with gold, talk to one of our trusted expert analysts. They understand these hidden truths better than anyone and how to protect yourself against them. We are all here to learn and grow together. As always, I'm Taylor Kenney with ITM Trading. Until next time.